let's discuss about something which finally have some look like life. Let's talk about cell. Let me write in big front. So we have cell. What are cells? Actually, cells are the structural and functional element of life. So cells are structural and functional elements of life. So we have discussed about those macromolecules. So we have those macromolecules and we arrange those macromolecules together to make what is called cells. Okay, we make these cells, and when we arrange those cells, what we form is called life. Okay, not life. Life means actually different organisms. Okay, so before making the organisms, we make what is called, what do you mean by life? We mean organs. So we make organs. So when you make organs, then we can make organ system, and this, from this organ system we eventually gonna make organism. So we have this step-by-step process. So we have macromolecules like carbohydrates, proteins and fats, and we have all this type of macromolecules, and we arrange those macromolecules together to make what is called the structural and functional unit of life is cell. So we have this cell and we arrange those cells. So again another type of arrangement here, and we finally end up with what we called organs. And we, in arranging organs to make organ system, we arrange organ system to make an organism. In higher organisms we have these organ systems, all the tissue systems and all these organs, but in lower type of organisms it may be end up here, it may be end up to cell. So they only can have those macromolecules and ultimately they have cell. So a cell can be meant life. Okay, so whenever we have cell, we can talk about life. So life begins the level of cell. So this is not no longer a level of biochemistry anymore. We have the macro level now, not the micro level anymore. But if you think about it, yes, cell is also microscopic, but these atoms and molecules are so small, they have to deal with those chemistry or chemical interactions. But in this case we have something called life, because we have what we have special here, what we have special in a cell but not in a lipid, what we have special in a cell with not in carbohydrates, proteins, in all these things. What is missing in all these macromolecules but present in cell is the life. So what do you mean by this life? It is an order. So we have order in cell, that makes the cell very special, that makes the cell distinguish between this or these other macromolecules. So this, that makes the cell special. Why it is order? So cell is ordered. And if you think about the second law of thermodynamics, it is stated that entropy is rising always. So we have this big E, that means entropy always. So we have this entropy rising all over the place throughout the world, throughout not the world, throughout the universe. The entropy is rising. And what do you mean by this entropy? Entropy is simply disorder. So it's a measurement of disorder. So universe like to be in this messy place or disordered place. So universe is a very messy, it loves to be a messy place. But in cell, only in cell we hang up with this idea and we do something differently. We do something to make the entropy down in cell. So whenever we talking about this barrier and we look at into the cell, then we can find this entropy decreasing. So I have decrease in entropy, and that what cell is. It is providing a medium that is different than the universe. Now a question can be arised in this from this place, that according to the second law of thermodynamics, entropy is rising. So in cell, can we have this second law wrong? No, the answer is no, because it is stated that the entropy is rising or entropy has to be in balanced state, and overall entropy has to be raised, it has to be rose, right? So if you look at this, if you look at a cell, entropy is falling. But if we look at the whole universe, if we make this universe system like this is the upper places, the upper places, the planets, solar system planets and all these things, and finally if we have cell here and we have all these systems here, we have an entropy falling in this direction, we has to have entropy increase in some direction, in some places. That's what is happening all the time. So the second law of thermodynamics is not broken, the law is obeyed by the cells too. Okay, so it is not about a particular place, it's about the whole universe. So the entropy is whole universe is still increasing, though the cell try to decrease the entropy in the field of itself. Okay, so let's talk about the very important structure of a cell that provides them a medium, that provides them to be separated from the world, and what it is. Guess what? And this is called the plasma membrane or the cell membrane. So let's talk about the cell membrane first, then we'll talk about an overview of all those simple organelles that works together and how they work together to make a cell function properly. So let's talk about cell membrane. So what is a cell membrane? Cell membrane is the barrier that keeps the cell separated from the outer universe, or that makes the, or that gives the cell its own place, its own layer, its own zone where it manages to keep those entropy falling down all the time. Okay, that's very important. As you see in the picture, the cell membrane is not monolayer, it has a bilayer structure. Okay, so cell membrane has a bilayer of phospholipid. Okay, so it is made up of phospholipid. You have a bilayer here, structure like that. It is a very bad drawing, but though we have a structure like this. So we have a cell membrane structure like this. It's a bilayer structure, as you see in this picture. It is not unevenly distributed like this, it is evenly distributed, and we have what we call proteins sticking out or sticking in throughout this membrane, or integral proteins like this, which transpand this membrane in many directions. We have something like this. Okay, so we have a structure like this. Okay, so this is the structure of cell membrane. What cell membrane does is, cell membrane gives a protection against the environmental situation. So it gives them the cell protection, and it gives its own zone. So in the internal side, when we have the cell membrane, we have two distinguished sides. One is the internal side and is the external side. So this internal side contains cytoplasm, and this outer outer side is the universe. Okay, where the entropy is rising, and the inner side of cytoplasm entropy is falling all the time. Okay, so cell is become ordered in all these cases, and there are a lot of playing role of this cell membrane, because it's not only separating it, it's not only giving the structural load, but it gives the functional roles too, because this is the only layer that can separate this cytoplasm. We have all those organelles in between. Here we have all those organelles in this internal portion. For instance, we have nucleus. We have nucleus here like this. We have mitochondria here. This, for example, is a mitochondria. Okay, then we have lysosomes here. And very important structure, we have this cytoskeleton here, which is made up of different very important proteins, and we also have this Golgi body over here. So let's draw the Golgi body here like this. So we have a Golgi body here, which is also important. Function properly. So we have all these ingredients, and there are many other ingredients. These are some of the important ingredients in the cell. So it separates the cell, and it makes a matrix. It gives a matrix for the cell. So matrix is a cytoplasm. It's made up of 90% of it is made up of water, and the different proteins, molecules, and all this type of this cellular organelles are floating throughout the places. Okay, so what a cell constitute of it, the first thing is a cell membrane, and the second thing is cytoplasm. Okay, so you have cell membrane and you have cytoplasm. It is more likely to be called a protoplasm. So why it's called protoplasm, and what is the difference between cytoplasm and protoplasm, we'll discuss later. So we have this, and cell membrane not only gives the structural support or the layering, but it also helps the cell to interact with its side by cells. So whenever we have a layer which separates it from the outer side, so we have this only one way to get through this layer. We have to get through this layer to be out of the cell or to get into the cell. So we has to have the doors inside this cell membrane, which has to be open to pass through this cell to another cell, because it is very, very important to make contact with the nearby cells and transmit the signals. It's very, very important. Not only transmitting the signal is important, but also it is important to interact with other molecules, such as signal molecules which come to the cell and sit on it and tell the cell to do the perfect or necessary work for a cascade of reaction to occur properly. It is very, very important. That's why cell membrane is important. So if we look at the cellular constituent again, we can find the cell membrane and we can find the protoplasm. Okay, so we have cell, and we divide it into two parts. We have this membrane and we have protoplasm. So among this membrane, we have discussed about the membrane, but we have another chapter about this membrane. We'll discuss the membrane structure and function later, but let's talk about the protoplasm. So what is protoplasm? The rest of the cell is called the protoplasm, except from the cell membrane, because cell membrane gives the barrier, and we have to have a matrix where the cell organelles are floated. Okay, so we have the matrix where it is called the protoplasm. 90% or over 90% of it is made up with water. So water is very important to balance this protoplasm. Okay, so in this protoplasm, it acts as a matrix. Okay, so here we can divide this protoplasm into two different parts. One will be cytoplasm, another will be nucleus. So one has to be the cytoplasm, one has to be the nucleus. So we have cytoplasm and nucleus, and if we add these two things, we end up with the protoplasm. Okay, so we called it protoplasm when you have nucleus within. When we make this nucleus a separate place, give this nucleus a separate place, we end up with what is called the cytoplasm. So rest of the protoplasm except from this nucleus is called the cytoplasm, because nucleus is a very, very important and a mixture of organelle present here, because it contains DNA, it contains a very, very thick point where you can make the rRNAs or the very important proteins or those ribosomes that is very, very important for making those proteins, and it has its own kinds of cytoplasm here, which is called nucleoplasm. So it's very, very important, very, very distinct. That's why we give it its own place, because very, very important person, we give it its own place, and we have the rest which is called cytoplasm, and this cytoplasm acts as a matrix for having the other organelles. So it contains the other organelles. Now we look at what the definition of an organelle, why we call them organelles, and what is the definition of organelle. So an organelle is a part of a cell which is covered by a membrane, and it has to have a specific function for the cell. That's called an organelle. So something we have, then for instance, we have something, we have a part of a cell which is not membrane bound, it is just floating around this cytoplasm. So we call it simple particles, we don't call them organelles. So when you call organelles, it has to be coated with membranes, and it has to have a specific function throughout the evolutionary history of a cell and throughout the cellular level. Okay, so in this case we can divide the cell types into two different groups based upon the presence of these organelles, and those are simple divisions. So we can divide the cell according to the cell type, and whatever the division will be like this. We have two types of, we have eukaryotic cells and we have prokaryotic cells. So we have both types of cells. So what is an eukaryotic cell? An eukaryotic cell, for example, this picture is a picture of an eukaryotic cell. So what is an eukaryotic cell? It is a cell of a very recent type of organism, we can say, in the evolutionary history. So if we look at the evolutionary history, we can find this is the previous years and this is the new year. So we are supposed to be here at the end of it, and this is the beginning. So we have a beginning here, we have here. So if we look at this direction, we can find the evolution of those cells, so cell types. In the previous times, we have very tiny organisms that contains on that's having a very pro type of cell. Pro means previous or very old type of cells. So those cells are not fully made actually, according to our term, because those cells do not contain these organelles. Organelles means this membrane bound particles that possess a particular function in the cell. So we don't have those type of organelles there, so we call it the pro type of cells, and those cells are very simple in action, very simple in structure. Most of the times the organisms are made up of those pro cells, only one pro cells, unlike that. Okay, we call them the prokaryotic cells or the old type of cells, and the eukaryotic cells is this type of cells, like the cells of ours, which is very advanced quality of cells, which have different divisions of cell, which are different organelles that are producing different types of important works. Okay, and they are very specialized qualities of organelles, and specialized qualities of work has been done throughout the process. We call it the eukaryotic. So this is the basic difference between eukaryotic and prokaryotic. And another important difference which can make us understand what is distinguishable between them. So in case of prokaryotic cell, we do not have this nucleus. Actually we lack this nucleus, because I've told you this nucleus is a part of protoplasm. Okay, it's a part of a cell. It is also a cellular organelle, but this is a very important, probably the most important cellular organelle of all here, because it has the hereditary material DNA. As we have discussed, the DNA has an enormous effect in the biology, so it contains the DNA. That's why it's a very important person. We give it a separate rule. But in this case of prokaryotic cells, the cells do not contain nucleus or membrane bound nucleus. It has those DNAs, but those DNAs are normally floating around those protoplasm, and they just stays there all the time like that. But those DNAs are super coiled, they are very tightened, so they are not released like this. They are very tight structure, but they are floating around all the time. That's a function in case of prokaryotic cells. But in case of eukaryotic cells, we have a way to pack those DNAs. We have a packaging of DNA. We have a packaging of DNA with the help of different proteins. For instance, we have histone proteins. We have histone proteins to pack those DNAs together tightly, and we store them in an organelle called nucleus. Okay, that's another difference, major difference between prokaryotic and eukaryotic cell. Okay, so it's this difference is based on the evolutionary history, or based on the simplicity of the cell, based on the presence of organelles or nucleus of the cell. So presence of organelles of the cell is based on this simple. If we divide the cells, we can divide according to the structure, we can divide them into further groups. What will be that division? That will be right here. The division will be like that. So we can divide into two groups. We can have what is called a plant cell, and we can have what is called an animal cell. So what do you mean by a plant cell and animal cell? The animal cell makes an animal, a plant cells makes plant. What is the difference between structural and morphological instance in plants and animals? Well, plants are very rigid, they are non-motile, they have different types of circulation systems. For instance, they have xylem and phloem, they have those cambiums, they have the different types of cell division. But in case of animals, we don't have those type of rigid structure like this. We have tissues, we have soft tissues, we have heart, we have blood, and